Hello, everybody. Welcome into Twerby this week in Rangers baseball, y'all. Hosted by me, Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News, dallasnews.com. Like to consider myself your Rangers insider. I am here on the eve of the opening of the baseball season of 2023. I want to let you know very quickly up front. Look, love doing these videos. Love the fact that you guys seem to respond to them. Also want to let you know right now, $1 gets you 3 months of dallasnews.com. You can check on all our Rangers coverage. We have a lot more printed stuff than we do video stuff at this point. All our Rangers coverage, 3 months, $1, gets you up to about the All-Star break, lets you get an idea of whether or not you really feel like my coverage is worth it and whether or not this team is worth it. So give that a thought, at least today, if you will. All right, let's get into the 2023 season that gets started on Thursday against Philadelphia, or if you're watching this after the season opener, it has started, people. Listen, I don't know how to say this because, as you can tell by this face, I'm normally a very giddy person. Mr. Upbeat, Sunshine, they call me. But I have to tell you that in 27 years of covering the Rangers, I have not gone into a season as excited to see as an observer the starting rotation that this team has put together. Over 27 years, I can't tell you the number of times Rangers have flirted with or had the idea that they were going to go out and get a big-time pitcher. And listen, I know there's plenty of you who are my age or older who were here when Nolan Ryan was here, but let's face facts. Nolan was coming here for 1 year at the end of his career. He reached some milestones. He had 2 really, really good years and some amazing accomplishments, but he was still at the end of his career. He was not Nolan Ryan at his prime. Kevin Brown was here, showed all kinds of abilities, but really didn't reach his peak until after he left the Rangers. Roger Clemens, Randy Johnson, the Rangers flirted with both of those guys in the late 90s. Didn't land either one when they were in their primes. They had to settle for Chan-Ho Park. That was a disaster. He was not an ace, not a guy who needed to be thrust into that role. They settled for Kevin Millwood a few years later, and Kevin was a serviceable pitcher. He picked up innings for them for several years, but again, this was not an ace. What they have now in Jacob deGrom, and I listen, we can keep going further. I can tell you that Yu Darvish was an amazing pickup. That watching his starts was electric. I don't think that you accomplished what he ultimately could accomplish with the Rangers. These were all pitchers who either arrived before or after their prime. I don't want to overlook Colby Lewis, who was as big a big game pitcher as this team has ever had. But again, none of these guys were aces in the primes of their career. And I think with Jacob deGrom, even though this is a guy who turns 34 this year, it's something different. To see a guy come out and throw 97 miles an hour with his first pitch of spring training, absolutely dot the strike zone up, make guys look foolish with his slider, and then come off the mound after throwing 28 out of 34 pitches and talk about some mechanical adjustments he needs to make. This is a guy with a different set of standards and a guy who has the ability to reach those standards. And I'm excited to see what happens if Jacob deGrom stays healthy this year. Whether or not he wins the Cy Young or is in the contention for the Cy Young, I'm excited to see what the atmosphere at Globe Life Field will be like for his games. With the roof closed, that park has the ability to be absolutely thunderous. Really hasn't had big crowds in it since it opened on a regular basis. And so if there is a buzz for a certain start, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. I think it's the kind of thing that a team feeds off, and ultimately a fan base. And we'll see what develops from that. But it also goes beyond Jacob deGrom. I really feel like with the entire starting rotation that the Rangers have, with Nathan Eovaldi in the number 2 spot, Martin Perez pitching 3, John Gray 4, and Andrew Heaney 5, this is quite possibly the best assemblage of talent the Rangers have ever had. I know the bar has been fairly low. This is a team who's not been known for starting pitching at any point in time in its history. I think the research I did was since the Rangers came to Texas in 1972, of the 26 teams that were in, or 24 teams that were in existence at that point in time, the Rangers ranked dead last in ERA over the last 52 years. Add everybody else in, and they rank ahead of Colorado. So it's not been a great pitching club. Some of that was due to the ballparks that they played in. As we know, the former ballpark in Arlington was a hitter's haven. Some of that was due to atmospheric conditions. Again, the former ballpark, which housed the team for 25 years, was hot. Arlington Stadium was hot. It was not a place where pitchers went to thrive. It was not a place where pitchers wanted to pitch. So I think you factor those two things in, along with the fact that I think the dimensions in this park are friendlier. It is built to house a good pitching staff. And now the Rangers have a good pitching staff to go with it, at least a good starting rotation. We'll get into the bullpen in a moment. But listen, this starting rotation is going to be the story of the season. As good as this lineup can be, with Corey Seager and Marcus Semien and Nate Lowe and hopefully a healthy Mitch Garver all season, and Josh Young, who I think has a legitimate shot at Rookie of the Year. Even with all of that, this team is going to go as far as the starting rotation can carry it. The rotation has the ability to make a life a little bit easier for a unproven bullpen that doesn't have a proven closer at the moment. It has the ability to make life easier for each other by going deep into games, therefore not taxing the bullpen on a certain night. Therefore, if the next guy goes out and does struggle a little bit, there is a fresh bullpen with all hands on deck available to help out. Likewise, whatever. If you knew anything about this team last year, you knew that the offense seemed to press almost from first pitch. It was clear that it didn't trust the starting rotation. It was clear that it thought it never could score enough runs. I do not know why the shadows have crept onto my face. Kind of like that episode of, once again, when I refer everything to Seinfeld, that episode where that girlfriend of Jerry's looked different in the light and the dark. Look at how I move and manipulate myself. Isn't this cool? But the lineup pressed, and I think it was very evident that this team struggled out of the gate almost nightly because it felt like it had to score runs early to get a lead. And when it didn't, then it became such an uphill battle. And I think this rotation has the ability to send the message that, hey guys, we got you. Get into your rhythm and function without a whole lot of stress. And if you do that, the lineup's going to function at maximum, I would say closer to maximum efficiency. So all over the field, this rotation, if it functions, and as Nathan Eovaldi has said, and he's a guy who's got a World Series ring, pitching wins championships. I think it sets the stage for this team to be more productive than it has been in a long time when it comes to wins and losses. What could go wrong? but we know all the health issues, right? We know Jacob deGrom's long health history over the last 2 years. We know that Nathan Eovaldi has a long track record of injuries. Andrew Haney as well. John Gray, I think, only made 24 starts last year. That all exists. Here again, I think the Rangers are in a different situation than they've been in the past. I know that there is a split in Rangers fandom about whether or not Dane Dunning and Cole Reagan should be carried as long relievers into the season, or if they should go to AAA Round Rock and pitch every 5th day as starters so that they could be in position to step into the rotation when needed. My take here is that it is important for the Rangers to get off to a fast start this year. The schedule sets up for it. They haven't had a winning April since 2016. They need to get off to a fast start. Therefore, they need the 13 best pitchers that they can possibly put together. They're going to have some pitchers in deGrom and Eovaldi who will be on fairly restricted pitch counts early. So you can almost script out the ability for Dunning and Reagan's to follow them in like a piggyback situation and get 3, sometimes 4 innings of work in almost every 5th day without putting them in what you would call traditional bullpen roles. And once some of that gets sorted out and maybe the Rangers figure out the pecking order in the back end of the bullpen a little bit better, then you make a decision on Dunning and Reagan's. But right now, they've proven that they belong on this team if the goal is to win out of the gate. And I think that they're both mature enough that even if they're getting 3 innings, and if they had to step into the rotation and they had 1 or 2 starts where they were more limited, where they were limited at 4-5 innings in terms of how far they could go, I think you could cover that. But I think when you factor in everything that the Rangers are trying to do, get out of the gate fast, support this starting rotation, put together the best pitching staff that they possibly can, Dunning and Reagan's belong, but they also give this club depth options that are better than the Rangers have had in a long time. And if you followed me here at any time, whether it's been on YouTube or whether on Twitter, I think you've heard me say over and over that I believe the focus of our organization these days should not necessarily be on the 5-man rotation, but rather a pitching pool that needs to be 8, 9, 10 options deep. The Rangers have a pitching pool this year with Dunning and Reagan's as the number 6 and 7 options at this point. Don't know exactly what is going on with Jake Odorizzi in terms of his arm fatigue. The Rangers now have the ability to kind of slow play that a little bit. He's obviously opening the season on the IL, but at some point in time, you'd like to think he would be an option. That gives you 8. Owen White is this team's best pitching prospect. It's entirely possible he could be capable of pitching in the big leagues before the middle of this season, at least talent-wise. Whether or not he's exhausted his innings allotment for the year fairly quickly, that's to be determined. White has a history of injuries and has never pitched more than 80 innings in a professional season. Just an alert here right now. I wish I could fan over to the right because the cat is attacking birds at the bird feeder in the window. That is the noise you may be hearing. This is a wild studio over here. I cannot tell you how wacky it is, as you can tell by the wackiness of my voice. Anyway, so you go to Dunning, Reagan's, Odorizzi, potentially Owen White, potentially Cole Winn, the 2018 first-round pick, who I think lost a little bit of steam last year and really needs to kind of step it up this year. Potentially Zach Kent, who will be at AAA Round Rock. Potentially even Cody Bradford, who will be at AAA Round Rock. The Rangers have what amounts to a legitimate pool. Now, I mean, when you get to 9 and 10, you're scraping, you're kind of scraping the idea of just how realistic is it. But I think that's pretty much it for every team. The idea is you hopefully, if you need a 9 or a 10th starter, a 9th or a 10th starter, it's for 1 or 2 starts. You're not talking about long term. So starting rotation wise, I think the Rangers are in a different position than they have been in a very long time, maybe ever. Now the bullpen. Bruce Bochy hasn't defined roles as of this point in time, this being Wednesday before the season starts. You've got Jose Leclerc out there, who was the closer at the end of last year. His velocity was down a little bit in spring training. And you've got Jonathan Hernandez, who had a great spring training and was hitting 99 miles an hour in Monday's exhibition against Kansas City. You end up kind of weighing this issue here. Do you go with the guy who's got more track record in the closing role, or do you go with the guy who seems to have the better stuff? And I think that's the thing the Rangers have tried to kind of sort out over the last week or two of spring training. As we sit here on Wednesday, the roster has not been set. And here's what I'm going to tell you. Don't worry. I've written about it a lot, but let me tell you what, the bottom line on this roster and what's not set is basically the final 2 spots in the bullpen. Comes down to one spot that I think has already been determined. I think Ian Kennedy will get that at the expense of Josh Sborz. Sborz would be DFA'd, potentially run through waivers. Kennedy goes on the roster. That leaves one spot for either Taylor Hearn or John King. Both guys are left-handed. Both guys have options. Both guys have been effective and ineffective at different points in times. Both guys have struggled on occasion with strike zone command. So what I'm going to tell you is I think that before the end of the season, both those guys are going to pitch in the bullpen. They may, on a regular basis, almost swap each other out. It may not be ideal for what either guy wanted, but this is the position in which the Rangers find themselves. And every team needs optionable pieces at the back of the bullpen because you're going to have some back and forth over the course of the season. So as we sit here, and as Bob the Cat sits here, on the eve of the 2023 season, I can tell you, state of pitching is unlike anything we've seen in Rangers recent history, at least. It's hard not to look at this group and think it can be a competitive group. You want my prediction? My prediction is in print and online. I had the Rangers winning 86 games. And the final wild card spot. Might be a little bit overly optimistic, but let's just play this scenario out that they play Seattle 10 times in the final, or 7 times in the final 10 games of the season. And I have, from my perspective, the team that wins that series of games, is going to be the final wild card team in the American League. Rangers play 3 against Seattle on the final home weekend of the year. Then they play 4 at Seattle on the final weekend of the year. So I think that's going to be the determining factor. They lost a lot of 1-run games to the Mariners last year. I'd like to think that Bruce Bochy and a more solid rotation and a more solid pitching staff from top to bottom will make something of a difference there. And now, to the best thing I ate all week. Maybe some of you have already seen the video of me eating food at Globe Life Field on Monday of this week, sampling all the new items at concession stands. From the 2-foot-long boomstick burger, which basically, here's the creative twist on the boomstick burger. They take out the hot dog and instead place it with a hot dog shaped hamburger patty. On a creativity scale, doesn't really do it for me. And really, at a ballpark, I don't know that I want a really thick burger, because I don't know that you get it cooked really all the way through the way I would like it. I'd rather have a thin patty. That's just me. If you want to try that burger, it'll be really nice on your Instagram page. And you can make a mess of yourself the way I did trying to eat it. Other stuff that's new, there is a flaming Cheeto pretzel. Again, it's like some Cheeto dust on top of a pretzel, not terribly hot. I really didn't think it was all that hot. There's a pizza dog, which is a hot dog with some marinara sauce, mozzarella, and pepperoni on a brioche bun. That was kind of nice. I didn't think it had a heavy enough kind of Italian flavor from the marinara or the pepperoni, because the pepperoni is so thin and the marinara seemed to be a little bit, I don't want to say watery, but it was just thin. Corn ribs, which are, you've seen them at Trader Joe's, they're basically slices of corn on the cob that have been individually sliced off. I think in general it's unnecessary. I can just eat the corn off the cob in one piece. I'm big enough to eat a full cob, big enough to eat a lot of stuff.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Working on it. I'm working on it, people. But the corn ribs were nice. It was like a reconstructed elote, because it had a little bit of cotija cheese and some mayo and crema and tahini on there, and so you could just, it was finger food, you could pick it up. I could see how vegetarians would like it as a kind of substitute for the tactile feel of actual baby back or spare ribs. I could see how kids would like it because it is an easy finger food. And the taste was good. You know, the concern with corn in a mass-produced environment is always that you can't keep it plump, because you like your corn plump. That it gets a little bit dried out, maybe a little bit mealy. So that's always a concern with corn. But listen, this was good. Trying to think what else we tried. There are Slurpees now available at the ballpark in case you need to inject copious amounts of sugar right into your veins. And I feel like I'm missing at least one other thing. The brisket croissant. That's what I'm missing. The croissant really actually looks more like a little Danish croissant, slice of brisket shoved inside, and then it's got a glaze that's based from Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. Again, Delaware North and Sweet Baby Ray's have a deal, so you get Sweet Baby Ray's at the ballpark instead of anything truly Texas. But this glaze is sweet enough and works well with the croissant and the brisket. It's a good, you know what I would do if I were you? That's the kind of item I would get for a 1 o'clock game or an afternoon game, because it feels almost brunchy. But it was surprisingly good. The brisket's a little bit dry, but overall the croissant is crispy, flaky, and it tasted kind of like a Danish. So it was almost like a kolache, like a ballpark kolache. I'd recommend it. And then of course there was a piece de resistance, the Hurtado barbecue stand, the independent barbecue stand that is now open permanently in Globe Life Field. God bless the Rangers and Delaware North and Brandon Hurtado for making this happen. It's great to see an independent business in Arlington make its way into the ballpark. The food has been fabulous. I had the burrito tacos that they are featuring on food sampling day. Had a little bit of the elotes with brisket that they are featuring. And then, of course, this giant beef rib goes for $44.99. Don't let that price scare you, because there's about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds of meat on there. It will easily serve 4 people, and you can just pick at it. I mean, you really can. You can pick the meat right off of the bone. As long as you don't mind getting a little bit sloppy. It's the meat was tender. Word of warning, there's only going to be 45 of these ribs available every day, at least about 45. I think Brandon said they'd have 15 racks of beef ribs, which is about 3 ribs per rack available every day. So I expect these to go fast. I also had brisket nachos at Tuesday's exhibition game. And let me tell you something. The nacho chips are your typical Tostitos or whatever they use at the ballpark. The toppings, however, are fantastic. The queso has got a little bit of spice, a lot of jalapenos, a kind of a green tomatillo salsa, some onions, jalapenos. And when I took this pile of nachos back to the press box yesterday, you couldn't see the chips, man. There was so much beef and toppings in there you couldn't see the chips. So thought it was well worth it. I hope by now your mouth is watering for baseball and for barbecue. And until next week, everybody, so long. This is good video.